Our next session, addressing emergency brake solutions today through partnerships. Please welcome to the stage your moderator, contributing writer, The Guardian, Whitney Bauch, Executive Director, Project Drawdown, Dr. Jonathan Foley, Chief Marketing Officer, Tradewater, Kristen Love, and Chief Sustainability Officer, Workday, Eric Hansen.
All right, well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much to Nest for having us. I'm Whitney Bauch. I am a journalist who focuses on climate and environmental issues. I am a contributing writer at The Guardian, as well as the editor of a print magazine called Atmos, which focuses on climate and culture. And I've also contributed to many other newspapers and magazines that you've read, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Financial Times, Bloomberg, Slate, and many more. Very excited today to be chatting about methane with an expert panel that is going to help us dive into this often neglected greenhouse gas. And we're going to get into that in a little bit, but want to provide an opportunity for all of these folks to introduce themselves. So John, could you start us off?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Foley. I'm the Executive Director of Project Drawdown. Project Drawdown is the world's leading resource for climate solutions. We're a science-based nonprofit that's independent, nonpartisan, non-commercial, and we try to provide the science and the strategies around climate solutions, figuring out what works, kind of what doesn't, and make sure that information is shared with the world in effective ways so we can actually kind of start to bend the curve on these greenhouse gas emissions in the most effective way. Think of us as like the consumer reports for climate change, if you will.
I love that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kirsten Love. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Tradewater. We are a project development firm focused strategically on super pollutant, non-CO2 greenhouse gases. So that includes refrigerants, so old CFC refrigerants that are left in stockpiles around the world. We go out, we collect, control, and destroy those. And then recently, we've added to our portfolio addressing methane, particularly methane from orphaned oil and gas wells, which we'll talk about a little bit more today. But yeah, that's who I am, and that's who Tradewater is.
Eric Hansen, I'm Chief Sustainability Officer for Workday. For those of you that don't know Workday, we are an enterprise software provider, a platform that helps large organizations manage both their people and their money, which we argue is your most important assets. We have over 10,500 customers globally, and we have a commitment to sustainability. You'll hear a little bit more about some of those sustainability commitments and our inclusion of some of the projects and the great work that Tradewater is doing.
That's great. So often in discussions of climate change, we talk a lot about carbon dioxide. And that's for good reason in a lot of ways. It's almost to the point where when we talk about greenhouse gases, we almost use carbon dioxide as a shorthand for the whole suite of greenhouse gases. And that's partly because carbon dioxide does make up a large percentage of the greenhouse gases that we have to deal with when we're thinking about what is warming our planet. About 75% of greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide. But that leaves another 25% that we're not often addressing when we're talking about carbon. And in a scenario where every degree of warming matters and has an impact on human life, the life of other species, and on our landscapes and ecosystems, every greenhouse gas matters. So we're here today in part to talk about methane, which is important not just because it's a part of the overall mix of greenhouse gases, but also because it has greater warming potential than carbon dioxide in the short term and lingers in the atmosphere for much less time, which represents both sort of a challenge and an opportunity in terms of what it means to tackle climate change. I'm going to turn it over to John to explain a little bit more about the importance of methane specifically in the fight against climate change.
Well, thanks again. You said that really, really well. So just to remind folks, but there's more than one greenhouse gas. It's CO2, yep, that's the biggie. But we also have methane, we have nitrous oxide, we have fluorinated gases, which Tradewater works on, and many, many others that actually all contribute to human-caused climate change. But some of them act differently than others. They all have different abilities to trap heat. Methane in particular has an incredible ability to trap heat molecule for molecule. But they also have different amounts of lifetime in the atmosphere. So they might live for just a few decades or for thousands of years, depending on the molecule in question. So these are not all the same thing, but they all have the same kind of characteristic of warming the planet to some degree or another over some periods of time. So you have to start thinking about this in very interesting ways. So methane, CH4 for the chemistry nerds in the audience, this is the stuff that we're going to talk about today. It's partly what we call natural gas. It's connected to fossil fuels like coal and oil and gas, you'll hear a lot more about in a minute. So that's part of the answer. But methane is also biologically produced. It's produced by, well, we all know about cows and what they do. By the way, cows don't fart methane. They burp methane, okay? It comes out this end of the cow, not the other end. So the more you know, kids. So methane comes out of enteric fermentation, which is just a fancy way of saying when cows and other ruminant animals burp up methane from their digestive process. That's a huge source of methane, as are rice fields, our landfills, as are wastewater treatment facilities. So there's a kind of biological source of methane that humans have added to, and a fossil fuel source of methane, and both of them are pretty darn important, adding stuff to the atmosphere. But the thing that is interesting about methane is about 2 years ago, we coined the phrase at Drawdown, emergency brakes. Because methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, but it doesn't last very long. It warms fast and goes away quickly. I kind of call it the James Dean of greenhouse gases. It lives fast and dies young, okay? People under 30 have no idea who I'm talking about, but that's cool. So methane is a really interesting thing. So even though it's about 15-something% of greenhouse gas emissions, is so far in real time, as we're living out the 21st century, it's caused about 1/3 of the warming we have seen so far on this planet. 1/3 of the warming. But we don't talk about it 1/3 of the time. We need to. And the thing is because it's such a fast-acting part of the climate system, if we can curb methane emissions really dramatically now in fossil energy and in agriculture and landfills, we can bend the curve on warming very fast. Again, this emergency brake, it's a faster-acting climate solution than a normal climate solution, like a solar panel or an EV or a heat pump would be. Those will take about 30 years to have an effect, really, on the atmosphere, but methane could give you a big impact in just a few years because it's that fast-acting part of the climate system. And that's why it's a big emergency brake, and we need to pull the emergency brakes, folks.
Yeah, that's well put. So Tradewater is working on this issue in particular, and as John mentioned, there's a lot of different sources of methane, and you all are working on sort of some specific sources of that. So could you tell us a little bit about the work that you all are doing to address methane as part of the climate crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are focused on orphaned oil and gas wells, and it's actually quite a big problem here in the US. There are about 300,000 documented orphaned oil and gas wells in the US, but EPA just came out with estimates that there's actually probably 1 to 2 million undocumented wells. And the problem and the challenge with those is that they're actively leaking methane today. So right now, all of those wells are leaking methane into our atmosphere, causing accelerating warming, right? And so we're going out, we're working with local governments to understand what are the documented wells, where can we start. There is some funding that has been given out by the government to address these wells, but it's not nearly enough, especially when you start to think about those undocumented wells. So we start with the local government, understand what wells do they have on their plugging plan, and where can we bring in financing, private financing from the carbon markets to address this issue at scale. And so we work with them, identify the wells, we go out, we measure the well, we understand what's the flow and the concentration. We do that a couple of times to make sure there's a steady state flow. And then we put together a plugging plan along with experts in the field that are from the oil and gas industry that understand how to plug these wells and plug them effectively. We get that plugging plan approved by the state, and we work together to make sure that the well is plugged. We also then are remediating the land. So oftentimes these are found in people's backyards, they're found on farmland, so they're leaking methane, but also other hazardous gases. So we're, again, plugging those, remediating the land, and giving it back to the landowner so that they can use it as they see fit.
That's great. And I know that getting this work done is not something that happens for free. It's something that takes money. And I'm curious to hear how you all have been able to sort of finance this and what role carbon markets have played in sort of being able to scale this work.
Yeah, so these wells will not be plugged otherwise. So the carbon markets really play a critical role in being able to get financing to where the problem is and the wells. So we self-finance the projects up front. We get carbon credits from that. We're currently operating under the ACR protocol, which came out last May, We're one of the first to create projects under this protocol. And once we generate those credits, which we actually should have our first round of credits issued this week, we then sell them to partners who are using them to address their carbon footprint or looking to support and accelerate the work. And it's from that revenue that we're able to reinvest and go out and plug more wells. And we're able to scale that work exponentially when we have partners on the other end that say that work is valuable, we value that carbon benefit, and we're going to invest by purchasing a carbon offset credit.
Gotcha. I think it would be helpful at this point to maybe show a video just so people can get a little bit of a sense for what this work actually looks like, if we're ready to cue that up. Lovely. Kirsten, is there any other additional sort of context you want to provide us about what we just saw?
That well actually was in Indiana, so that happened earlier this month, which was quite shocking to me as we got into this work. When you think of oil and gas wells, you think of Texas, Oklahoma, but there's a bunch of these in the Midwest, and it's because when we first went after oil in the Midwest, they were not commercially viable for a number of reasons. A lot of them are leaking H2S and other toxins would make it very hard to make them commercially viable. And what happened is that companies went under and just left them there. That's why they're orphaned. There's no one responsible for these wells. And so that one, like I said, was just in Indiana, and there are a number all across the nation. And we hope to be able to get to scale and get to a lot of these wells. And we're able to do that really through partnerships like we have with Workday.
Yeah, that's a great sort of way to lead into talking a little bit with you, Eric. I think it's pretty obvious how these two are involved in climate action in terms of the organizations they're with, but I'd love to hear about Workday. You all are not necessarily explicitly a climate organization, but what does it look like for you to think about the role that your company can play in sort of fighting this crisis?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, we're a tech company, right? So our value, we don't make physical goods. We make software. We provide that software to our customers globally in data centers. Those use energy. There's a climate impact. And so what we're trying to do is reduce that climate impact to the extent that we can, because we know we're part of our customers' value chain, right? If our customers are looking at their carbon footprint and they're looking at where they're spending their money for goods and services, we're part of that footprint. So we're looking to make sure that we're mitigating that to the extent that we can. So we've set science-based emission reductions targets, and we're on our pathway to reduce those emissions in alignment with SBTI. But we want to look beyond our value chain and say, all right, well, there's going to be residual emissions even after those reductions. Based on our operations, what can we do that's most catalytic right now? What money can we spend on which projects that will make the most difference? And so there's a handful of ways that we're doing that to essentially mitigate that residual carbon footprint that we have. And one of them is through this partnership with Tradewater. So we have other partnerships, and to be clear, we're members of things like Frontier, which is an advanced market commitment, $1 billion to develop and accelerate carbon removal technologies that are still nascent, but we know science says we need that removal to be 5 to 10 gigatons by 2050 in a net zero scenario. But we know there's also work that needs to be done right now. And we know that our work with Tradewater can be catalytic in nature. And as Kirsten described, so many companies, when you may purchase carbon credits, there is a sort of an over-the-counter transaction that occurs. And it may occur for each company differently, but mostly it happens year to year. At the end of the day, do a footprint, you do your annual footprint, you figure out what portion of that footprint that you want to address, and you buy those carbon credits. So for us, we wanted to look at it a little bit differently and work with Tradewater to say, all right, what's the most catalytic use of our funds? And in this case, we set up a 4-year purchase plan. And so now Tradewater has a guaranteed 4 years of revenue from us purchasing these carbon credits. They can take that and go to the bank and use that to essentially finance scaling up their operations to plug more and more wells. I think the other thing that was really interesting for us is exactly what John and Kirsten mentioned in terms of methane, specifically non-CO2 gases. If we're going to hit net zero, and we know something like what 30-ish%, is that right, John? Is methane of the existing warming right now. We're going to need to tackle this. It's not going to be just CO2. It's got to be methane. So we wanted to play a role there. And so we built a portfolio of different credits and opportunities for us, and we think this is a critical part of that portfolio in terms of where we can spend money now to be most catalytic.
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about how you think about that full portfolio. And you're talking about focusing on methane and working with Tradewater. When you were looking at sort of the range of options out there, how did you all decide this is the kind of partnership that we want to invest in?
Yeah, well, first of all, I love Tradewater as an organization. So Tim, founder, co-founder, Kirsten, they're good people, high integrity. Workday, it may sound trite, but our core values really guide almost everything that we do. Integrity is one of those core values. So we're looking for partners that really fit that value of integrity and can stand behind what they do. And then when you zoom back at the lens of the voluntary carbon market specifically, I think we're lying to ourselves if we don't admit that there have been challenges in the voluntary carbon market in the past. And most of those challenges have to do with integrity. Are your dollars going towards actual climate action? Or is this a shell game where you're giving money to action that would be business as usual? And it's very clear that our money we are spending on these carbon credits are going directly to plug orphaned oil and gas wells that would not otherwise be plugged, right? These are orphaned, no solvent operator. There's nobody on the hook right now to go out and plug these wells. And Tradewater's not going to do that out of the goodness of their heart. They're going to need money to go out and do that. And so we're going to provide that. We see it as, in the world of the voluntary carbon market, is highly additional, which means our money is beyond business as usual. This plugging would not occur without the carbon credit market. And so we're really excited about this project specifically, which we believe is one of the largest partnerships like this to date since this project type emerged in the last couple of years.
Yeah, Kirsten, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about what this partnership sort of enables for you. I mean, I know, Eric, you're talking about making sort of the kind of 4-year agreements that allow for some visibility for the organization into the future. But I'd love to hear more about what that looks like and what a good partnership looks like for you all.
Yeah, that's a great question. So our whole business operates by leveraging the voluntary carbon markets and the carbon markets at large. If we don't have someone on the back end that says, this work is valuable, we're going to buy that carbon benefit from you and use it toward our footprint or our goals, we can't do the work. So we have been able to take the revenue from the work that we do and selling our carbon offset credits, and we reinvest it right back into the work. So to give you a sense of scale, I joined Tradewater about 5 years ago, and when I first joined the company, we had done our first voluntary carbon market project in Ghana around our ODS refrigerant destruction, and we did about 135,000 tons of CO2 equivalent through that project. Methane and orphaned oil and gas wells are so pervasive, and it's such a big problem. We see a real opportunity to scale. So this year alone, we're going to bring 1 million tons of impact from these projects to the market. So that's 5-year difference. Again, we're just taking that money, reinvesting, and really catalyzing and growing. So when Eric and Workday step in and say, we're going to support this over the next 4 years, it gives us the confidence to go out and accelerate that work. And also gives us the capital to go out and accelerate that work. And so we see a pathway where we can bring 3 million tons of impact every single year to the market. And if we can get more folks on board, like Workday and Eric, to say, hey, we believe in this, we believe methane is a big problem. If we all get together and say we can actually solve this problem and bend the curve, we see a pathway to 22 million over the next 5 years. And we're just going to grow from that. We're going to continue to reinvest and continue to scale this work. And we really do believe, I think I heard someone say actually earlier today, that methane is a problem that we can all solve in our lifetime. We can address the problem, and we can actually feel the difference in warming in our lifetime. It's just a matter of aggregating that demand on the back end and giving that clear market signal to project developers like ourselves that, yes, go out and do this good work, and we're gonna be here to support you.
John, I know a lot of the work that you do at Project Drawdown is looking at solutions and not in the sort of like pie in the sky, we want to feel good about what we're doing, but really looking at concrete, rigorously researched solutions. I'm curious if you could give the audience any sense of how they can discern, like how to recognize a genuine climate solution, something that's actually going to work.
Well, a little tongue-in-cheek, go to Project Drawdown and drawdown.org, and we'll tell you. But we need good science to help that's independent of commercial interest to really stand up and say, no, this is what the evidence actually says. So look for that. Look for good peer-reviewed work. Look for actual data, and look for things that are actually independent of commercial interest, like Drawdown, but other organizations as well. And that helps you, give us a little bit of a BS detector, because there is a lot of low integrity kind of work happening. This, I think, is very high integrity kind of work, but there's some stuff out there that isn't so great in the voluntary carbon markets. But also, I hope the audience realizes too, like, isn't this insane that there are like oil and gas, kind of infrastructure and old coal mines that we've just abandoned? They're not even being used to create fossil fuels. And that's not so great either. But these have absolutely no societal benefit whatsoever, and they're leaking tons and tons of this potent greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. I love that companies are stepping up to do that, but frankly, I think oil and gas industry ought to be paying for this as well, and maybe give companies like yours a tax break, but having the people who polluted in the first place pay the bill, not Workday or something. But here we are. What a tremendous opportunity to kind of really cap a big emission that is not doing anybody any good whatsoever. This is kind of like one of the dumbest environmental problems we still have, and thank goodness we're starting to address it. And it's a real opportunity to start to bend these curves in a meaningful, scientifically valid way. Getting rid of methane emissions that don't need to be there is such kind of a climate solution. I wish we'd started this a lot earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, because there are a lot of emissions issues that are tricky to bend the curve on because they're things that we use. They're things that our sort of societies are built on, and that doesn't mean that we can't change, and it doesn't mean it's not worth it to change, but it is kind of ludicrous to have things that are just emitting these potent greenhouse gases that we're literally not using for any purpose.
I mean, an analog too. I mean, on a different day, you might have talked about food waste, also a pretty big source of methane because a lot of it ends up in a landfill. But that's another kind of climate solution. Here's something that generates no benefit to anyone, and we have to pay to get rid of it. And the world throws away about 30 to 40% of all the food grown on this planet, and a lot of it ends up being another methane source as well. So again, there are these kind of like, at the end of the day, this might be a bit of a tangent, but like at the end of the day, I think about a third of what we need to do to stop climate change is stop doing stupid stuff, like throwing food away and like anybody here from the pro food waste lobby or the pro let's spew methane out of abandoned wells lobby? I haven't met you yet. Hope So there's a lot of these kind of low-hanging fruits of like, wait a minute, why are we doing that? That's crazy. So it's good to see the private sector step up. I think the government needs to step up a lot more, and maybe we need to kind of put the bill back more in the fossil fuel industry, who in fact created the mess in the first place that these folks have been cleaning up. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunity here if we put on our thinking caps and look for this, but also make sure the science is corroborating this with independent data, which the nice thing is you can measure the methane that was there before, and you can see the plug. It's a very verifiable kind of carbon offset project, as opposed to, yeah, somebody somewhere isn't cutting down a tree. This you can actually kind of sit there and measure it and verify it and document it very, very carefully. So I kind of like the approach that we're seeing here today as something that stands up to the rigor of data and science.
Yeah, for sure. Kirsten, I'm curious if you could provide any context about how we got here. How did we get to the point where we have millions, thousands of abandoned wells in the country that are just leaking toxic climate pollution.
Yeah. So this started back when we were all looking for oil and gas, and everyone was drilling all over the place trying to find where we can develop commercially viable wells. And again, it was pretty shocking to me that there were so many in the Midwest. We tried literally everywhere across the United States to see if there was some way for us to access oil and gas. And in some places it was not viable. And oftentimes, like I said, it was either it's under a lot of pressure or it's leaking other contaminants that would not make that oil or gas commercially viable. And so a lot of these were small companies actually trying to then sell into the larger corporations, and they just went bankrupt. And so there is no owner, there's no one responsible. Those businesses are no longer here. And again, because of the way that oil and gas developed in the United States, it's pretty pervasive across the nation. And that's how we got here. It's not a problem just in the US, though. I believe Australia has a similar problem. They set up their oil and gas systems very similar to how we did it in the US. And then also in developing countries, it's a concern as well. But again, you have companies out there trying to establish a business, and then they put a lot of investment into drilling a well that just did not pan out. And the only option was for them to go bankrupt and to leave this well to just actively leak methane and actively leak other hazardous gases. There were no regulations at the time when a lot of this happened. A lot of these wells are really old, and so that's why they're left there.
I think when we talk about things like methane or carbon dioxide, it can feel very abstract, and it's like, this is a problem about the planet, which is almost too big to really keep in your mind at one time. But the truth is there are impacts for human health as well, right? Like if you're living next to an unplugged oil or gas well, there are impacts for the climate, yes, and those will have an impact on your life, but there are also impacts for human health. We know that even living in a home with a gas stove has a quantifiable impact on human health. If you imagine that sort of scaled up when you're living next to that as an unplugged well, that's a real challenge.
Yeah.
On the flip side, it means there's also a real sort of multi-solving solution baked in there, which is that if we address some of these issues that have such catastrophic impacts on the climate, they also can make for solutions for environmental justice communities that are living on the front lines and living next to these wells. Which means whenever there's sort of a problem, there's the solution is sort of baked in as well.
Yeah, I know. I think, Eric, you've dug into that quite a bit too, right? In terms of just how many people live near these wells, right?
I mean, one of the reasons this project type was really exciting to us is the social impact, as you mentioned. So the data that I've seen from a university study, I don't recall the university offhand. It's in my blog. You can read it. But 4.6 million people in the U.S. alone live within a half mile of these orphaned oil and gas wells. So that's a lot of people. Those are families. Those are, at-risk individuals. It could be elderly or other people with other, health impacts. And as you mentioned, carcinogens, other, problematic toxins that are in the environment. This could be in farmland. This could be in people's backyards. It's a challenge, and so that really drew us to this. Is we knew that there was, multiple facets here, not just global warming, not just climate change. But human health, and how can we play a role in catalyzing action there that's meaningful and impactful and beyond business as usual. Really attractive to us.
Eric, having sort of been through this process and looking at the landscape, looking at what's out there, what insight or takeaways would you have to offer other business leaders who are sort of looking at making some of these decisions themselves about how to invest money that they might have on behalf of the climate?
Great question. So first, if you're at a company and you're interested in looking at ways that the voluntary carbon market can actually help you, and you want to sort through the BS and get to what meaningful strategy and action looks like, we have a plan for you, a guidebook for you. So we partnered with a company called Patch, who is a platform for climate action that we worked with on this project. And we put out a guidebook. It's a Chief Sustainability Officer guidebook. You can go download it through Patch's website. And it basically walks you through how to participate in this market, how to look for high impact projects, how to set a strategy at a corporate level, how to get buy-in, how to set an internal price on carbon across your business, and different example portfolios and ways you can catalyze that action. Are you going to do a compensation model across your footprint, compensate for a footprint? Are you going to do a contribution model where you're giving a certain percentage of your revenues or dollars, or a hybrid, which is what Workday does, or anything in between? So we've put that out there, and we're hoping to, help. So if you're at a company and you want to put your strategy together and you don't really know where to begin, start with that document. And then if you still don't know where to begin, reach out to me. I'm here to help. We're here to sort of inspire action. I think, we're a tech company. We're not part of the Magnificent Seven. We're not at that scale. So the way that we scale action is actually inspiring others to take action. And what I would offer is that there's money on the sidelines right now that could be put to good use, to useful catalytic climate solutions right now. You don't need to wait for SBTI to come up with the perfect standard for net zero that lays everything out in a beautiful standard for you. You can get off the sidelines and take action right now. And I think that's sort of the message that we're trying to get across. You can go beyond your value chain. There are a lot of hard to abate sectors that if you stack those up and look at your Scope 3 emissions or your value chain emissions, there are a lot of hard to abate sectors that you're probably as a company not going to be able to unilaterally decarbonize. So what action can you take now? I would offer that investing in projects like this are a way to take that action right now and not wait.
And I know we're getting close to time, but I'd love to hear, I guess, one last question from each of you, which is, what is sort of driving you right now, or what's inspiring you to sort of keep going in the climate fight? Is there anything that's captured your imagination, or anybody that in particular, or books or anything like that that you're learning from? Any of you can jump in.
I'm gonna go.
All
Eric
of
looks
John's
ready.
work.
Yes, yes.
All hail John. I love Project Drawdown as a guidebook. So, and Jonathan Sim on my team is out in the audience somewhere, so keep me honest, John. I think when you came on board at Workday, one of the first books I tried to give to you was Project Drawdown. True story.
We're getting a nod.
Because I think it's just a great menu of solutions. High leverage, here's where you should begin, here's where you should prioritize. And that gives me hope, because it's out there. We can take action right now. That's what gives me the most hope that we're going to solve this crisis. Because it's all out there. The solutions are in front of us as long as we have the audacity to deploy them.
Yeah, I can echo that. Drawdown was one of the first books given to me when I entered this space as well. It was given to me on the first day. And I think it's the science, right? We have really brilliant people out here working and understanding the science and then communicating and translating that to us so that we can put real action put real plans into action, right? And the technology is here for these solutions that are going to bend the curve. Like, we know what to do. As John mentioned, these are just like, we should probably stop doing that, or the solution is there. And we just need to divert some of the funding toward these solutions so that we can solve it. Let's solve it, and then let's move on to the next thing. Let's move on to the other solutions that are going to take a little bit more time. Let's diversify their portfolio, and I've heard a lot of that conversation this week. I've heard a lot of it from the various scientists out there, in addition to Project Drawdown, that really lay out the order of operations to do this. And that really gets me excited, because we can bend the curve, we can buy time, and we can make sure that investment happens across all of the solutions all at once. But putting some priority and some order and operations to it, we can actually affect global warming, and we can still have a planet for us to thrive on for years to come. And that really gets me excited. So yeah.
Well, and we didn't pay for those endorsements, by the way. That's very cool, though. But I'm kind of inspired by what we just heard today, the focus on kind of near-term, practical, real-world stuff. That's plugging a big methane leak. That's pretty awesome, isn't it? So I love that we're kind of focusing on practical, near-term things instead of pie-in-the-sky technologies that never seem to arrive. So we have a saying around Project Drawdown that, now is better than new, and time is always more important than tech. So it's really good to see even like a Silicon Valley tech company realizing that, like, hey, wait a minute, there's some stuff we can do literally with nuts and bolts right now that actually can contribute to climate change and pull one of those kind of emergency brakes we need to get the world back on track. So I think when we see that kind of the importance of time, the importance of real world practical things right in front of us, those are just so abundant, and we're just beginning to pick those low-hanging fruits. Let's really focus on that and not get distracted by the shiny object syndrome that's kind of been pervasive in climate for a little too long. So let's roll up our sleeves, let's literally get to work and plug the leaks, let's fix what we have now, and just march forward every day. There's certainly enough work to do for everyone if we kind of get those orders of operation right and focus on what's right in front of us that can have the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time with the most benefits for everyone, not just through climate change, but also through health and equity and human well-being and justice. That's what's inspiring me. It's like, let's roll up our sleeves and get stuff done, folks.
Well, I think that's a really lovely note to sort of close out on. I think the thing that I often come away from these kinds of conversations with, and that I really want you all to leave with, is the sense that you have power. Whatever you do, I don't know your job, I don't know you, but whatever you do in whatever role you're in whatever community in, I guarantee you have power, and you probably have more than you think. It might mean taking a little bit of a risk in the kinds of conversations you're having with your boss, with your board, with your family. But as John mentioned, time is of the essence. Every degree of warming matters. And I hope that you all leave the room with that sense that you can do something. I don't know what it is for you in your sort of role in your community, but I'm confident it's something, and I hope that these folks are a little bit of an inspiration of what that can look like. So thanks so much for being here. Have a great one.